I am a little bit concerned because the topic for this evening is quite difficult. It is one of the indeed of 3 or 4 most difficult topics indeed in humanitarian thought and the humanities and the social sciences. And when you touch upon the topic, which is very delicate, you always have a little bit of a concern that the consideration of such a topic may well become perfunctory. However, we do hope that we can use and avail of your help. The level of social trust, which the sociologists and the social scientists and the psychologists and the economists started to measure in different countries and cultures, turned out to be a concept which revolutionized the social sciences. It turned out that the level of social trust and the social capital, because trust is not the only thing that the social capital is built of, but it is one of the most important. This concept, this notion has become so potent, so important that it defies a whole number of other things, including, but not limited to the measuring of how the countries may move along the path to democracy and how well they can move in their economic development, and eventually how great would be in different countries the level of satisfaction. Indeed, this was a basic cell, which on one hand has a lot of bases. As to one, the level of social trust is high, but also a lot of consequences. We shall now distribute questionnaires that you would have to fill. The questions in this questionnaire are primarily analogous to 3 or 4 studies conducted in this field, which is one of them being the World Values Survey, WVS. Another study is the European Social Study, ESS, and several other, such as the Barometer of Trust, which is measured by the Eidelman Foundation, the Gallup research, so when you reach to having these questionnaires, and when you revert these, and we would be happy for you to process them immediately, and then we shall try to calculate the votes online. Just a couple of remarks. When something is formulated in the questionnaire about people, you really don't have to be talking about the people who have convened in this auditorium. You really have to be talking about people at large. This way we would be able to compare the level of social trust here with the average for Russia and for other countries. So let us fill these in, and then we shall continue. Has everybody got a copy? Good. Good. So if there are questions, how many of you do not read Russian? Please raise your hands. That's one hand, we can see it. Well, there's at least, and now translation has been provided. Well, we're talking about a different level of trust. So the evaluation would be different. So we're talking either a theoretical situation or something that you see in your common world. Yes, indeed. You have to imagine a person that you might see in the metro, in a bus. And then we'll be talking about what we call radius of trust. But indeed, here we're talking about an accidental person that you might have happened to meet either at, as I said, a metro stop or in the bus or in any usual surroundings. Are you talking about the community in Russia? Yes, indeed. Other questions? Question number 2. What is use in this sense? Question number 2 has it means dishonest behavior, something to be done at one's benefit, which is cutting the pie not in half, but with a counteragent to have a greater piece of the pie and you incurring more costs. You will have to hand these back in 2 minutes. 1 other minute for you to fill these in and to hand them. Hand them in.
Окей, давайте считать, что все уже заполнили и сдали, а кто этого не сделал, поскорее заканчивайте, пожалуйста.
Let us scan those and try to put those who have to collect the filled-in questionnaires. All right. Silence, please. Thanks. It will take us some time to process your answers, and we can't predict. We cannot predict the outcome. If this level of trust will be the same as, say, in Denmark or the Netherlands, or else what you would see in Russia or Bulgaria at, say, the end of the 1990s. But it is well known that most social polls of that sort in Russia that were started to be conducted in the 1990s have for the past years shown a very, very low trust level compared to other countries. The first question, how much you can trust people in general, something that the sociologists call generalized trust. This indicator in Russia has been going down throughout the 1990s and fell down to 20 to 80. 20% of people, the general 20% believed that people can be trusted, and 80% of the people thought that people can't be trusted and must not be trusted. This dynamics is, in a way, and could be compared to this indicator in other post-communist countries, and we would like our conversation to be built in that way. And for our conversation to be well structured, I would propose to have a logic of our discussion as to we should first discuss why is it that in our view, in my view and your view, why is it that the level of social trust is still and so low? What are the causes and the inherent reasons for that? Let us first talk about the causes. Then I will quote some data on comparisons. Then again, we shall try to analyze what does this influence What does the fact that the social trust level is so low lead to? What problems originate? What problems does this low level of social trust entail? What tasks are we not in a position to move forward on until the social trust is heightened in the society? And the last question is about the possible steps and measures, precautions, and indeed programs to raise social trust and how it can be stimulated. This is the logic I would like to propose for today's conversation, and in the process of our discussion we shall be able to receive the results of this calculations. The first block of questions: why, in your opinion, the level of social trust in Russia is so desperately low? What causes or reasons might be at work? Your statements should be 2 to 3 minutes maximum. Yes, please. And please introduce yourself. Andrei Tesliev from Khabarovsk, the Pacific University. One of the evident reasons when we speak about the post-Soviet time, let me start by saying that when you would take the network building logic, that when trust goes up in the social networks through repeated interaction and positive experience, when not only the actions of the counterpart are predictable, but also the person that we are not aware of So what I think, if you believe that you run contrary to the reputation, for the post-Soviet space, the phenomenon which is often expressed in the common language or even diagnosed as oblivion, a loss of reputation, when the former social background in the Soviet times and the multi-level social interaction, these forms dissipate, and these modern forms, the industrial modernity, is overshadowed or indeed it dwindles, and there is no replacement, there is no change. And the level of trust, we can only be talking about trust in the face-to-face interaction, only in those cases when indeed because there is no network, there is no social net, then even in these repeated interactions, my trust level still cannot be high. Because if the other party believes that the benefit from the subsequent interactions is still lower compared to what you might have, if this bonus is still high, then there are no rational explanations. In this sense, this is one of the most important social stimuli, because within the Soviet society, the reputational background was restored by the 1970s. And what we have seen in the 1980s or 1990s is the annihilation. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for this. Before we pass on to your colleagues, of course, a lot is related to the dismantling of the so-called Soviet identity. But when we remember the end of the 1980s, 80s and the beginning of the 1990s, I do not quite understand why is it that the social trust fell so dramatically? Well, clearly, when the social system is dismantled, it is clear that people would not be particularly trustful towards the government or the authorities or even the trade unions.
But common people just they remain very much the same. Why does this total growing distrust, does it apply not only to those who are in ruling, but why does it encompass people en masse?
Ковалев Сергей, Волгоград. Ну, я вот предлагаю перевести это вот на товарно-денежные отношения. Тут, может быть, как раз отвечу.
I suggest probably we would take your question, what people distrust. Well, I do not really know the reason what it was like in the 1990s. I can judge by it just hearing to what people say. These people are just anything between 40 to 60. They were the people who back in the 1990s were active. And this is what they say. But this is when there's cooperative partnerships were set up, just common businesses, joint businesses. But at a certain time, you would see somebody just cheating on their partner. All those people who communicated with one another at the time, in this other way, they would let each other down. And this is just like a wave of negative when, say, someone would cheat their partner and he would cheat another partner and so on. So these wave-like processes, they're still going on. And although it may not have happened to us, each of us know somebody who either was cheated, was just with either some kind of investment scheme, or maybe he was cheated away from his flat, or maybe like pyramid investment. So we all have just a friend or a pal or an acquaintance who really got into a cheating scheme, and somebody just cheated him. If I say borrow money from you, I cannot be sure. Will you return the money back to me or not? I don't know. Thank you. Thank you. And amongst other things, every second citizen of the Soviet Union had a deposit with Sberbank. And what happened to those savings deposits, we all remember. Please, you now have the floor. Well, good evening, Andrei David from Krasnodar. It seems to me that this build of distrust, creating this atmosphere, this is a systematic policy by the state, which is being done pursued by for many years. And the Soviet Union, or horizontal links between people were destroyed. Millions of people denounced on their neighbors. Any type of independent association was considered by the state as something totally unacceptable. Nowadays, the system is being revived in the West form. State propaganda shows that any kinds of association are false. You cannot trust NGOs. NGOs exist on the money through grants given by the West. All political parties are no good. There are only swindlers who want to cheat your money out of business. Well, business, we've heard what it's like. So you can only believe this in the state. You can only believe our supreme leader. But at that, when people immediately face institutions of the state, more often than not, this experience would be negative. Those who probably went to police or who went to outpatient clinics, who was an observer at an election, they surely can recall this experience, which would be much more often than not negative. Thank you, thank you. Well, come on, now your question to you, from you, sorry. I'm Blashenka, I'm from Borce, Bosnia and Herzegovina. I studied Russian University of Friendship of People as a political scientist. What is policy? It's always about interest. So if you want to trust the state or somebody, even say your friends, everybody pursues their own interests. For example, I want to share my example with you. When I visited my home country, we had a civil war, problems about nationalism, and for that matter, I'm Serb, I'm Orthodox. And I live in the capital where the city is divided into two parts. And one day when I was 15, say, I just was with my friends and I wanted to go over to the Muslim part of the city, and boys who wanted to beat us, they chased us. And the police, when they saw it, they didn't react at all. And for this reason, I do not always, for example, trust the police, but this doesn't apply to Russia. As to Russia, I want to say that, for example, citizens, the more educated they are, the better they understand that everywhere there are interests behind everybody, and the less, for example, they trust mass media and, say, the state. Why? Because the people who go into politics, they all have, there are certain exceptions here, they all have their egoistical interests that they pursue. People don't go into politics to make this world a better place. No. They pursue their own selfish sort of interests, be it fulfillment or creating a position in society or whatever. Well, thank you. Unless this regular feature which you said, the more educated people are, the less level of trust they entertain. If this feature were really the case, then indeed what we would see, would be that most uneducated people would live in Denmark, the Netherlands, Canada, Australia, and Nordic countries, Sweden, Norway, Finland. Level of trust is highest in those countries that I just enumerated. No, I won't really comment about what I think about education system, because it's not always people who graduated from university, they're not necessarily smarter and cleverer and educated. I won't complain here about how in many universities people pass exams, how many people of well-educated people in Russia, it's still a high percentage, but it's not necessarily mean that this is the case, that that education system is so rigid that, I don't know, like, let us from the left from us, because we only have the right flank speaking here. Daria Cherneshkova from High School of Economics. I would like to first touch upon issues that we already discussed. There can be no trust when horizontal links are weakly developed, and it is vertical links that grow. The things that we discussed before, when you raised the question, how long does the process take? When, well, seemingly normal person, a deputy, becomes a god or perceives himself as god. In Russia, social gap between society and the government is very big. There is no solidarity. People don't feel they belong. And, there is just a gap. How can you have any trust here? But if you speak about just human relations, about interest, then human relations, just common level of trust between people who sit here, for example, in this room, they're more about emotions. Not everybody is here thinking, why am I sitting next to him or her? Then probably I would like to say something to defend, to protect, it is whatever we have in our mind, this is what we project into the world. And the discourse that is dominant in society, if everybody thinks that people are for sale, that even if somebody has never, say, tackled the court system, he would sort of project this thought. It may not be the case necessarily, but this reproduction of stereotypes on the verbal level, this may generate another reality. Maybe we can move away from this and open our own eyes, but we fear this. Thank you very much, Daria. Thank you. The idea raised a very important question. There is a number of social and political studies that show exactly this projection, which Dasha spoke about. Whatever we have in our mind and whatever we see in the world around us. For example, that he wanted to intercede for. There are just what they call cooperative games, when economists just measure how well prepared people are for cooperation, or to which extent stick to the strategy, I would much rather defend myself and try to cheat on my partner. And it turns out that people who are more pro-solidarity in their position, at that, they hold the opinion that other people behave in the same way. Those who are more egoistic, they're more selfish, they're also sure that the world is like this too. This is the way to behave, and there cannot be around. This projection, rather, which Dasha spoke of, it works at all kinds of levels, at various levels. Well, I fully agree with what was discussed today. Yes, Anton Petrov from St. Petersburg. And I just wanted to add that maybe Berdyaev said that a Russian is a nihilist and a dreamer. Two these characteristics like this. In our culture, we have some special features that have to do with denial of social links to some extent. But on the other side, we understand that social institutions, I suppose Foucault thought that social institutions, they exist in a person's mind. The state exists in a person's mind as well as the society is there too. So it's all, as the speaker says, sits. It means it's part and parcel of his personality, belongs to him. And when the collapse of the Soviet Union took place, every person in his or her mind, some changes occurred there too in terms of psychological impact. So certainly, we might say that Russian people in this sense, we returned back to our normal sort of condition without any sort of supralayers determined by the impact of the state, and this is what the state certainly does. In this way, Russian people got back to nihilism and dreaminess. Anton, you're saying things which are, I suppose, dangerous, which will strongly contradict the textbooks of history and social sciences that children will be studying by in some 5 to 7 years, because necessarily they will write that what is typical of Russian people is community of spirit and of property and of everything. And now various ideologies claim that that serfdom, it's not about slavery. It's not some chains that Russia threw away several centuries later than the civilized world. No, it is some kind of social structure which makes it very different, which belongs to human nature and so on. This is something new we're saying. Let us look from the left, where we have... Please, you. Alexander Balonik in Moscow. Well, I don't quite understand why everybody tries to appeal to the 1990s. In point of fact, the problem arose much earlier, in the 1930s. For decades, we were taught to shut ourselves away from others, and people got accustomed to say if they speak, they would rather be frank and open when they speak with their friends at home, having tea in the kitchen. So that's about it. Yes. Thank you. Well, still, about the 1930s, but in the late 1970s, in the early 1980s, Well, this is what I remember. Social sociology, Soviet sociology did not run studies about that. But what I remember, level of trust was very high. If we don't speak about institutions here, but certainly in big cities, people had very clear ideas about the CPSU and so on and so forth. But the level of trust trust in general was very high. It's very high. Okay. Okay, now please you. Microphone, please. Microphone, please. Microphone. Sorry, microphone is reluctant to be on. I'm from Yaroslavl. I agree with what Dasha said. In what sense I wanted to continue. In point of fact, Boris was right about one thing. Okay, you can divide two matters. First, trust for institutions and to institutions in general. Certain just human trust between fellow men. But in Soviet times and post-Soviet times, I suppose you will see some difference between them. But if we speak about crisis of trust in general, there is, I suppose, a good term that is called burnout, especially a professional burnout. So trust was sort of burnt out. We see a burnout case. Say when can you imagine that in many apartment blocks where you do know your neighbors, but in Soviet times you could leave your children with your neighbors who would take care of them while you go to wait for shopping. So each time when you sort of overcome this kind of, and this trust just burnt out, I would put it this way. Thank you, this just experience, yes. Yes, please. Roman Rybchuk from Khabarovsk. You asked me a question about why is it that we lost trust between people and then loss of trust to government and to other institutions. As you were saying, back in the 1970s, the level of trust was very high, but then we saw this sort of change and loss of trust between human beings, fellow humans, and I have this thought just that probably for a long while people were limited in their, well, maybe consumption. And it turns out that, well, by the time when the Soviet Union collapsed, there was an urgent need to satisfy the need for consumption, and this opportunities opened. I've recently read a study about people, to which extent they can say, like postpone their everyday needs to achieve some purposes in the future. And the study was done about children and how much devalued is the future in future profit and in this regard, it turns out that trust between people, it lost its value, but possibility of consumption right now, it became a value in itself. And it turns out, very much like one of the speakers put it, people began to cheat on each other, and it just started a chain reaction, and the level of trust was lost. Thank you. Yes, please. Artyom Filatov from St. Petersburg. I just want to raise some points. I suppose in terms of trust, what matters is to make an opposition between sort of infantility and maturity. I have an example, just difference. Allegro is an express train from St. Petersburg to Helsinki. When you board this train in St. Petersburg, you go through security. They check your passport and everything, and visa and whatever. When you board the same train in Helsinki, they never inspect anything and nobody checks you. On the way, they will certainly inspect your train, your ticket and whatever. I suppose this is where we see a very interesting collision. The interpreter thinks that the gentleman is not aware of the difference between, especially in terms of security threats in Russia and Finland. So whatever the speaker assumes that that the Finnish people think that people would not go and train unless they have a passport on them, they have the visa, valid visa, they have ticket. And I suppose editor of the TV program that where I'm an editor, we had a program on trust. And I gave him just this example, and he was absolutely convinced that if we take away these inspectors who would check, then Petersburg would be like free rider without visas or tickets. Brilliant. So if you don't control anybody, people will do themselves harm with maximum. Yes, in point of fact, yes. Well, please, you now have the floor. Denis Grekov from Altai region. Much was said about trust here, and I just noticed that everybody speaks about trust like some kind of absolute category, and in point of fact, this can be a relative category too. For example, trust may depend upon the context where two people meet each other. Because it's not too spherical, it's that we have just people who interact. It's not just two spherical horses in vacuum. That was a joke. But there are people who interact under certain circumstances. For example, trust can be mobilization trust. When we see some calamity befalling some community, people have to face the same difficult situation, and no matter if they're keen or not, they still must share the same, I don't know, spoon or we don't know, whatever, in their food with a person they may not know. In practical terms, in Altai region when we were flooded, and I had to just observe, I just observed situations like this. In some way, like a very different situation which we see two people in a city, well-to-do, well-off, which do not know one and each other and don't care for one another and would never really care to meet each other. You know, context really impacts trust very strongly, and everybody, depending on the context and from his or her own personality traits, which many people mentioned, can behave under different situations in a very different manner and can respond if you meet somebody else in a very different manner, and the difference may be radical. Microphone, please. Microphone, please, because I'm somebody who hails back from the times of the Soviet Union, and certainly there was such huge trust between people that my mother could leave her child with to be taken care of the neighbors, because there were no kindergartens, and the queues, there were long queues, waiting lists for kindergartens, and you could always borrow 3 rubles or even more to the time on your salary day. And Yuri and I know a great philosopher who died actually, all in debt because this was the way he lived, because there was no such thing as banks and whatever. Yes, there was trust in my childhood when everybody went to election day and there was a portrait that everybody knew. Everybody would just put just sand on snow, and it was a very beautiful picture when people would walk on this yellow sandy road. I suppose we really state that there is no trust and confidence, but it's not so much about personal trust. It's a matter of personal trust when we speak about friendship, when it is somebody you love, when it is a common cause. But how can you educate the most important thing for modern confidence and trust? That is trust for institutions. And then translate this emotional part into rational. That if, say, a certificate that you need somebody to issue to you, it needs to be issued, and you don't have to go rounds and trying to get this certificate based upon trust to some other method. Suppose the thing we should really discuss seriously, it's not so much that people really come together when things turn pretty nasty and hard. And the Soviet Union was perfectly fitted, indeed. It was the field for this human trust. I hope that we do not live in the times of the Soviet Union any longer, and work of the institutions per se should give us trust. It means that we have to publicly speak about, say that what we lack is efficient institutions which we can trust. So I suppose the matter of trust, personal trust, remains and has always been like this. It hasn't disappeared at all. Whereas the focus right now, I suppose, needs to be shifted towards institutions. Also the question, what can we do to make them work effectively? I mean, effectively means independently. Thank you. So actually, in point of fact, this is quite a complicated matter. In terms of the bulk of the studies that I've seen, it turns out that trust for people and trust for institutions, this is variables that are closely linked. In practical terms, there are no countries where trust for people would be, for example, low, whereas trust for constitutions would be high, or the other way around. Again, in the Soviet Union there was sociology, it was a bourgeois science, art of human, but empirically, from personal memories, we remember that the level of trust was really very high, level of personal trust, and level of trust for institutions too. The problem is that actually, at least all the Soviet social sphere and social character, sociality, as the speaker puts it, so it was of such nature that apart from building communism and socialism in one country, this did not work anywhere else. It would immediately disintegrate and collapse. And this socialities, this trust has not evolved yet. And for that matter, from this perspective, what we see happening now is an attempt to put this old Soviet sociality, to revive it, and the attempts may be sometimes funny. It's got the war in the south, these were Soviet times, and at that everybody realizes that these are similarities. They're not the real thing. This is just an attempt to use some fake or artificial made revive old images of the past. But government does not fully understand how they can shape this new sociality that would not be Soviet. And at the same time, our sociological surveys headed by Mr. Skolnikov and his aides returned first findings of the surveys they've done. Let me first tell you how, for example, the things are like in other countries. I may just quote one question out of 3. It was clear from us what happened with everything else too. Well, for argument's sake, the first question from this questionnaire: do you think that most people can be trusted? In the Netherlands, 60% answer in the affirmative, under 40 think they cannot. So average point would be 60%. In other European countries, on average, it was about 4 to 5. But special Nordic countries were 7, 8 out of 10. It means very high rate of confidence and trust. Whereas in Southern Europe and Slightly worse in Eastern Europe. It's about 30 to 40%. Russia, in different years, gave figures like 30 to 70. That means 3 points out of 10. By the late 1990s, early 2000, we fell down plummeted to 2 points out of 10. And if it's not asked as a question as a question in a survey, but we asked as dichotomy, an opposition, yes or no, about 20% say yes, you can. The same applies to Bulgaria, slightly better, up to 25%. Bulgaria is just from all Soviet countries, let alone CIS. This is a country where all those social indicators rank worst. Czech is better and higher. The situation ran worst in Romania and especially in Bulgaria. Somebody is standing apart are Southeast Asia and China.
And there it's not like Netherlands, but 2.5% of the population. Yeah, they say that you can trust them. Yeah, the second point is that in the last 15 years, so in the 90s, and so the number of people who think they can trust so went up by 16 percent points. 16 from 30 to 20 percent points. And then the trust as regards trust to institutions. So there is a very strong correlation between the trust to people and the trust to the state institutions. In Bulgaria, and so at some point in time, so it was a similar picture. So they thought that 70% trusted the president, 50% trusted the government, the attorney general, the judiciary, the police, so 15-20% max. That's how many trusted. Then in our audience, what the first question that I asked you, so